A German bomber is flying at 15,000 feet. No fighters near it, no searchlights on it, it should be safe. Then, out of nowhere, it's not there anymore. Just smoke. The gun that killed it never got any better. Same barrel, same shell, same crew that had been missing for years. So what changed? In under 18 months, that exact same weapon became 50 times deadlier than it was before. Not proved, not graded, 50 times. German high command didn't believe the reports at first. Their own scientists tried to reverse engineer it and walked away empty-handed. And the Allies were so terrified of this thing falling into enemy hands that they banned it from ever being fired over land for almost 2 full years. Because one single unexploded shell in the wrong hands could have erased the entire advantage overnight. Stick around, because by the end of this video you're going to understand exactly how a tiny piece of glass and wire hidden inside a shell casing helped win World War II. And if stories like this are your thing, hit subscribe right now, because the War Files drops one of these every single week, and you are not going to want to miss what's next. Here's something most people don't know. In the First World War, close to 3 out of every 4 soldiers killed died from artillery, not bullets. So when World War II started, every army on Earth built its entire strategy around one idea: guns win wars. But here's the problem nobody talks about. Those guns were almost blind. A crew got rough coordinates. They did the math with paper, rulers, and mechanical dials. By hand, they fired blind into the fog of war and prayed. Somewhere out there, a forward observer watched where the shell actually landed and radioed back corrections. Too far left, short by 200 yards, try again, and again, and again, until eventually, if everyone survived long enough, the shells finally found their mark. That was cutting-edge technology going into the deadliest war in human history. Now, shells themselves came in different flavors: high explosive to flatten things, shrapnel to shred infantry, armor-piercing for tanks, smoke to hide movement, and in one disturbing, documented case, Japanese forces disguised poison gas shells as ordinary smoke rounds and used them against Chinese troops. A war crime hidden in plain sight. But the real secret to any shell was never the explosive. It was the fuse. That small mechanical brain in the nose that decides the exact moment everything detonates. The simplest version just went off on impact. Point, fire, boom. The advanced version was the mechanical time fuse. Hand set to count down anywhere from 0 to 30 seconds, so the shell would burst in midair right above enemy heads, instead of wasting its force punching a hole in soft dirt. Sounds brilliant. Here's the catch: get the timing off by a hair, and the shell explodes too high to hurt anyone, or too low and buries itself uselessly in the mud. And on a real battlefield, there was no room for error that small. Wind, humidity, temperature, even how worn down the barrel was, all of it threw the math off. Crews were essentially trying to time an explosion to the exact second with tools that belonged in a classroom, not a war zone. Every miscalculation meant a wasted shell, and a wasted shell meant men on the ground kept dying while gunners kept guessing. Nowhere did that timing problem cost more lives than in the air war. Take the infamous German 88, arguably the most feared anti-aircraft gun of the entire war. Radar and searchlights fed data into a command post built around a mechanical computer that tried to predict exactly where a bomber formation would be 20 seconds from now. Because that's how long the shell needed to climb to altitude. Every gun in the battery fired at that predicted point, all at once, on command. Genuinely advanced for its time, and still shockingly inefficient. On average, German gunners needed roughly 3,000 shells to bring down one single bomber. 3,000 shells, 1 kill. Then the war moved to the Pacific, and it got worse. American ships faced dive bombers, torpedo planes, and eventually kamikaze pilots who didn't even need to land a clean hit. They just needed to reach the deck. One hit could sink a warship and kill hundreds of sailors in minutes. So the Navy did the only thing it could think of. It turned its ships into floating walls of gunfire. Iowa-class battleships carried dozens of quad-mounted cannons and machine guns stacked along every rail, capable of throwing literal tons of steel into the sky every minute. And Japanese pilots still got through. They dove low and fast, banking unpredictably, threading needles through curtains of fire that should have been impossible to survive. The big 5-inch guns were supposed to be the real answer, using the same kind of time-fused shells. But the same old math problem followed them out to sea. A 55-pound shell set to burst at the wrong split second just sailed past a plane that had banked at the last moment. Ships were burning through mountains of ammunition for embarrassingly few kills. Something had to change, or this war might come down to who ran out of ships first. And somewhere in a lab, far away from any battlefield, a handful of engineers were already working on the answer. They just didn't know yet that it was going to be one of the most closely guarded secrets of the entire war. The breakthrough actually started quietly. In Britain, years earlier, British scientists floated a wild idea: what if the shell itself could sense when it was near a target, and detonate on its own. No math, no guessing, no human correction needed at all. They sketched the basic concept in 1940, and with Britain stretched to the breaking point by the Blitz, they handed the idea across the Atlantic to American engineers. The Americans treated it like it was the crown jewels of the entire war effort. Here's the problem they faced. The instant a shell fires, it experiences roughly 20,000 times the force of gravity, in a fraction of a second, on top of a violent spin from the rifled barrel. Now try packing a working radio transmitter, receiver, amplifier, trigger, power source, and multiple safety switches into a nose cone a few inches long, and expect every single component to survive that. It took years of brutal trial and error. Engineers ended up potting the entire electronic guts in resin and wax, like sealing a fly in amber, just to stop the parts from shaking themselves apart mid-flight. They solved the power problem with a tiny sealed glass capsule of battery fluid, stable in storage for months, shattering open the instant the shell fired to activate the battery on demand. And in early testing, the thing was so sensitive it occasionally detonated near passing seabirds. Real casualties of war, apparently. By mid-1942, in the darkest stretch of the fighting, they finally had a working shell. They gave it a deliberately boring name to hide what it actually did: the variable time fuse, or VT. Early tests showed it was over 50% deadlier than the best time fused shells ever built. Full production was ordered immediately. Here's the short version of how it actually worked. Picture a miniature radar, small enough to fit in your palm, screwed into the nose of an artillery shell. The instant the gun fired, the battery activated and the fuse started broadcasting a steady radio signal. When that signal bounced back off something solid, a bomber, a fighter, later, advancing soldiers, the fuse read the change and calculated the exact right moment to explode. Close enough to shred the target. Not so close it wasted the blast. It had a built-in delay so it couldn't destroy the gun that fired it, and if it never got close to anything, it was rigged to self-destruct in midair. A deliberate choice, because losing even one intact shell to the enemy could have handed them the entire secret. Think about that for a second. A shell smart enough to know when to kill, and smart enough to erase itself if it failed. The results were almost too good to believe. Ships firing the new shells watched their kill rates against Japanese aircraft explode overnight. The number of shells needed to down one plane collapsed from the thousands into the low hundreds. Overall gun effectiveness reportedly jumped by roughly 50 times what it had been just months earlier. Britain got its hands on the technology soon after and turned it on the German bombers and V-1 flying bombs terrorizing London. British crews reported hit rates jumping by as much as 80% almost the moment the new shells reached their batteries. This technology was considered so dangerous, so catastrophic if it fell into enemy hands, that Allied command banned its use over land for nearly 2 years. Water only, where a dud shell would sink to the bottom of the ocean instead of sitting in a field waiting to be found. 2 years. Think about how many lives could have been saved on the ground during that time. But the fear of the enemy getting even one intact sample outweighed everything, until one battle changed the calculation completely. That ban held until December 1944, when Hitler launched his final desperate gamble, the Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. Under pressure from General Eisenhower himself, the restriction was finally lifted for ground combat. Roughly 200,000 of the new shells were rushed to American units under total secrecy. What happened next was, by every surviving account, horrifying. German soldiers had spent years trusting that a foxhole and thick tree cover would protect them from artillery, that shells needed to physically strike the ground to hurt you. Thick winter fog made them feel even safer, convinced Allied spotters couldn't see them well enough to call an accurate fire. The new shells didn't need to see them. They didn't need fog to clear. They simply burst in the air above the tree line, exactly where soldiers were hiding, raining shrapnel straight down into positions that had never been vulnerable before. A trench with no overhead cover offered zero protection. German after-action reports flooding back to high command described Allied artillery becoming, almost overnight, inexplicably and catastrophically more lethal than anything they'd faced in years of fighting. By the end of the war, American factories, many of them repurposed from making Christmas tree lights and small radio tubes, because the manufacturing skills happened to line up almost perfectly, had produced roughly 22 million of these fuses. Demand was so enormous that ordinary holiday lights all but disappeared from American stores. German and Japanese intelligence both knew something had changed. Both tried to reverse engineer captured evidence. Neither ever built a working version before the war ended, partly because that self-destruct feature kept doing exactly what it was designed to do, denying the enemy the one intact sample that could have exposed the entire secret. A tiny device, hidden inside the nose of an ordinary shell, quietly rewrote the rules of modern warfare, and most of the men firing it never even knew its real name. If you want more stories like this, the hidden inventions and secret programs that actually decided how wars were won, subscribe to the War Files and turn on notifications, because next week we're uncovering another piece of history they never taught you in school.